Thanks, Roseanne. And I want to say, first off, that this was, for me, when I developed this interest in generational differences, it really stemmed from my own frustrations. You know, and I can remember when I was a resident swearing to myself that I would never be the faculty member that walked uphill both ways in the snow, barefoot, you know, and was when giants ruled the earth. And I have become that. So one of the things that became clear to me when I was introduced to this literature about generational differences and how it plays out is, one, that they're real. I'm convinced of that. And two, that, you know, the question that's always asked when I give this talk, and I give different variations of this discussion actually to learners and to teachers, the question that's asked in both settings is who should change, who should move to the other one. And I think that remains an interesting discussion, but I'll share a little bit at the end how I've come most days to a resolution of that. The other sort of caveat that I want to give right up front: generational differences, gender differences, racial differences, all of these are not meant to be not meant to say that everybody who falls in a certain generation follows these characteristics. These are generalizations that fit some folks and don't fit others. You can actually there's a little quiz online that you can do. If you Google millennials, it comes up with a little quiz, how millennial are you? I'm actually pleased to say that I've moved from boomer to Gen Y, back to the sort of more like a because I text. That got me a lot of points in moving me into a younger generation. So the other thing about these generational generalizations is that they really apply to our Western culture. So, you know, so take that in mind, and let's have some fun as we go through this. So I have a quote for you. The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for adults, and they love to talk, I added, or text, rather than work or exercise. They no longer rise when adults enter the room. They contradict their parents. They chatter or text in front of the company, gobble down food at the table, and intimidate their teachers. Do you all care to guess? Aristotle, you're close. Socrates. Socrates. So we're at, 470 BC. So, it's just a reminder as we go into this that each generation assumes that the subsequent generation, has issues. So this is actually shared to me by Tom Painter, who, as all of you appreciate, has great insight into our students. He sent me this from The Onion, which is, that most reputable of journals. Majority of parents abuse children. A poll whose findings were part of a 700-page report by a coalition of child abuse monitoring and prevention organizations indicts nearly 95% of American parents. My parents always tell me I have to finish all my math homework or I won't be allowed to watch TV, said study participant and abuse victim Derek, 10, who told researchers that some of his earliest memories were of this kind of mistreatment. They're so mean, I hate them. And while we're not quite getting this from some of our medical students, it's actually not that far off the beaten path. So we'll go from there. So I want to give you two scenarios to think about how you would have responded. These are both, true stories from me. You're facilitating a small group session of second-year medical students. You have 9 people in your group. One person has his laptop open when you enter the room and keeps it open. He participates in the discussion, but it's clear that he's reading and responding to email throughout the session. At the end of the session, you give him feedback that this is not appropriate. Your evaluations include one that states you're dictatorial, and actually I was maternalistic, not paternalistic. Second scenario. And I would argue that when I read that, I was pretty cranky. Actually, I wouldn't argue that. I would just tell you that I was pretty cranky. Anne had just sorted out that she wanted to look at gender differences in the treatment of pneumonia in the hospital. She and her mentor are sorting out next steps by email. He asked her to review any pertinent literature. She emails him back and asks him if he has the articles. He writes back she should do a lit search. She writes back asking if he could please identify for her how to go best about the search. She states that he's unrealistic and not respectful of her time. So what are my objectives? Well, really my objectives are to help you better understand scenarios like that. I want you to gain a better understanding of what motivates different generations in the academic environment. I want you to better identify when these perceived conflicts in communication and what I call professionalism miscues arise from generational differences. Because really the thesis I hope to play out for you is that some of these things that those of us in the older generations perceive as a lack of professionalism are a misunderstanding on our part of how the younger generations see the world and operate. And so that it's not really that they're being, the challenge is deciding if they're being unprofessional or if you're just reading a generational miscommunication. And then I want to talk about how to manage these differences to maximize your teaching effectiveness and your mentoring, and how you can really help people walk their way through and understand some of these things. So here's just sort of an example of the world we live in. Different generations. Younger person, are you getting a lot done on the grandpa box? The what? The people in my generation do our work on phones and tablets. Grandpa over here is very proud that he also has a laptop. Sonny, he'll text the 90s and let everybody know. Different worlds, different places that we live in, and different ways that we do business and like to do business. So let's talk first about what we mean by a generation. There are factors that define the generation. They are common life experiences and events. They're the popular culture, what's going on at the time in particular you're growing up, because when you're growing up is what defines how you see the world and think about yourself. We're going to talk about parenting behavior here, pros and cons, what's happening in the world, politics, the economy, how you see as you grow your ability either to change the world or the expectation you might have about what you can hope to achieve. Lots is being written right now about how our children are the first generation that can't expect to do better than their parents. So when you grow up in an economy where you either think the world is your oyster or the world is going to be tough for you, those are different things that you think about. And then finally, science and technology. Different generations have different historical perspectives and different core values, but that does not mean that their professionalism, their work ethic, and their commitments are different. That's the key here. So these generational differences have received a huge amount of attention actually in the business literature. And they're reflected in perceptions of work ethic, work-life balance, loyalty to the job. But as I said, they don't necessarily reflect differences in competency, commitment, or professionalism. And making that translation from behaviors to values is sometimes very challenging. In the business world, there are two sets of seminars that are run. They run seminars for managers about how to best relate to your new young hires, in large part because there's tremendous intellectual capital in these young people, right? And when you bring somebody on and you train them, if they leave in 2 years because you're not meeting their needs, that's a huge loss. That's a loss for your corporation, and it's a loss because you put all that money into training, and it's also a loss in that these are bright young people that you would like to say. All you have to do is think about Google and how Google runs their operation, right? Google has met the generational challenge. Come and get a massage, and when your brain needs a break, go play pool or basketball or, do some yoga, all on site, right? Food, good food there, available. Kind of like how we do it in the medical school here, those kind of things. The other thing corporations do is they run seminars for young employees about how to interact with your boss. So the business world has actually taken it from both sets, I think, trying to get people to the middle. And as I play this out for you, what I hope to do for you is to leave you with a set of tools where maybe you're not reactive and you stop and you think about what's going on, and is this really something that should make you mad, or whether it's just a difference. True confession, I'm good about 75% of the time. I'm much better than I was before I learned about this stuff. Although those of you who know me know that this year I got mad and turned off a podcast in the middle of a lecture for the first-year medical students because they made me so mad. Highlighting my boomer self, which remains close to the surface. So we're going to talk about 4 generations. The traditionalists, birth years 1925 to 1945. The boomers, 46 to 64. Gen Xers, 65 to 1980. And the millennials, our favorite generation. And really now, most of our medical students and residents are millennials right now. So there are a few traditionalists left around. These are folks born between 1925 and 1945. These are folks who are survivors. They survived the stock market crash and the Great Depression. They fought the good war and won. They conquered evil, and they built a lasting peace. So this is a group that survived hardship and went on to do amazing things that they're very proud of. They're very patriotic. They raised the largest generation of American children, and they built a space program and landed a man on the moon. So this is a generation that kind of thought they could do anything. Now, they actually created the middle class, which is, we hear a lot about that when we talk about politics these days. This is the democratic ideal and the traditional American value system that we keep talking about, the shrinking middle class. The traditionalists are the ones that made the middle class available for the boomers to move into it. The values, the American value system, dedication and sacrifice. Grew up in World War II, had nothing, paid your dues, worked really hard, nose to the grindstone, and slowly and surely you will advance. It's honor and loyalty, right? It's about, your country calls you to serve, and you go because it's the right thing to do. They're very patriotic. They believe in law and order. Not like today, but if the government says this is the way it should be, this is the way it should be. It's hard work. It's respect for authority. You play by the rules. You don't change the rules. You play by the rules. And there's this construct of delayed reward and duty before pleasure, which is back to pay. Remember, they grew up in times of deprivation, went and fought a war, came back, went to school on the GI Bill, worked hard, and built a better life. Styles, command and control leadership. I'm in charge. Remember, I am, as you move up the chain, you become authority. And since I believe that authority was right, when I'm the authority, I should be right. It's my way or the highway, and you go through chain of command. Logic, not magic. Traditionalists don't talk about feelings. That's for you, maybe, if you even think about them. They don't like role-playing. And they do the right thing, and they suffer silently. So if they're not happy about something, they go through chain of command. They figure that they'll just pay their dues and get to the other side of it. Suffering silently is not a part of our current reality, I would suggest. So boomers, faculty in the room, many of us are boomers, born between 46 and 64. Kennedy was elected, Camelot, youngest president, it's all excitement and change. It's a little bit scary. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were living on the brink of war. JFK was assassinated, but you know what? The world changed for the boomers, right? Birth control pills were introduced. The feminist movement, the sexual revolution, Woodstock. And along with sort of all of that revolution also came the revolution in civil rights and the Vietnam protests. This was a generation actually that believed they could change the world, and the world was changing for them. They wanted change, they asked for change, they protested and partied, and change happened. They also grew up during the greatest economic expansion this country's ever seen. So boomers, by and large, although perhaps our younger colleagues would not agree with this, in general are optimistic and idealistic. They believe they can change the world because it changed while we were young. But they believe it's done by hard work right now. They live to work and to get ahead. They're highly competitive. They're uncomfortable with conflict. While they believe in teams, there's a hierarchy in a team. So it's not about we're all equal and we come together. There's somebody leading the team. And many of us grew up with traditional upbringing. And so for the boomers, there is this sort of mismatch of gender roles because we grew up with stay-at-home moms. Rosie the Riveter turned into Donna Reed, and then Donna Reed was at home. And then the sexual revolution happened. And in the 60s and 70s, the feminist movement happened. And for women of my generation, we believed we could have it all. We didn't know how we were going to do it because we had no role models ahead of us doing it. But the Ivy's coeducated. Graduate schools moved from small percentages of women to 50% women. So there was this group of women, and actually it's also about men too, because if your partner is doing these creative things, then you have to figure out how you're going to do it. So it was really uncharted territory of putting women in the workforce, because what they had grown up with for most folks was very different. They believe in work. The way to get where you want to do is to work. They were workaholics. The job defined their identity, and I think this is very true for medicine in particular. Good news, boomers are professional and warm, but don't get in my way, right? Because I'm moving up the ladder. And I think we see this actually a good bit, this intolerance of those who work shorter hours or insist on a personal life. Because we might have a personal life, but it's at home and it's hidden, and the women came into the workforce as boomers trying to do it the way it's always been done, with a stay-at-home mom and a working dad. Followed by Gen X, born between 65 and 80, the introduction of the personal computer. So this is the group that for whom technology becomes an issue. I was talking about remembering being in college. Want to see a show of hands? How many of you used a slide rule? Right? There's not very many of us, right? Right? I mean, I grew up doing all my chemistry with a slide rule. And then the first calculators came out when I was in my late college years, and they were these like laptop computers almost, and they were $500, and they added and subtracted and divided and maybe did square roots, And now you can get that for 99 cents at the dollar store. So the technology changes were enormous. I remember doing, when you were we were so excited when we got electric typewriters that would erase. You could go backwards and erase. And of course, it didn't really erase. It just put the white out over the wrong letter. So it was a very different age. Unlike growing up in an era where there was civil unrest and you could change the world, it was an era that was sort of disillusionment. Watergate scandal, the first resignation of a U.S. president, massive. This was an economically very difficult time. I can remember when I graduated from residency in 1983, and we were talking about buying our first house. The unemployment rate was 15%, and the interest rates were 15%. Right? I mean, it's an era you just can't even imagine. So this concept that you're growing up in this economic boom was very different. We put a man on the moon before, and now the Challenger exploded. So, right? I mean, it's very different in your mindset of how you think about things. And this sort of, that we were the best and we could do anything we want. Well, now we've got oil everywhere because of the Valdez. We're ruining Alaska. The Challenger exploded. And the sexual revolution kind of came home to roost with AIDS. For Gen Xers, they grew up with these two career families, and they viewed parents off, and again, these are generalizations, but as workaholic and absentee. They came of age with fallen heroes, and as a sort of reactive response, and I think we certainly see this, time and leisure became priorities, right? They questioned authority. They're cynical. Because if authority is blowing up the Challenger and the president is resigning, why would you trust authority, right? In particular, they watched their parents pay huge dues at great cost, perhaps, so they had no interest in self-sacrifice. They're techno-literate. They're self-reliant. And one of the biggest differences between Gen Xers and millennials is this one right here. They're self-reliant and resourceful. These are the latchkey kids because they have the workaholic parents. Now, the Gen Xers had the millennials. And so for them, this is the group of young people in particular. If we look at sort of the gender literature, which is defined as the opt-out generation, so we see a lot of press about young women going to top colleges, top graduate programs, and then opting out of work. There's a great line in Susan Sandberg's book, Lean In, and she didn't say it, and I can't remember who she quoted, but the line was one of the early feminists saying, we work really, really hard to give women choices. We just didn't expect the choices so many of you would make. And so it's sort of this response to the workaholic boomers. Family is very important. There's a study of women who graduated from Harvard Business School in the late 80s. A third of them are working full-time, a third are working part-time, and a third are completely stay-at-home. And remember, this is the best and the brightest. This is the best and the brightest. We are now seeing a lot being written. There was an editorial. Somebody wrote an anesthesiologist wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times maybe a year and a half ago, sort of talking about the issue of women physicians working part-time. And is that right? Because as much debt as everybody accrues, medical training is highly subsidized. Highly subsidized. And is it fair to take a space and be trained and then not give back to society who paid for your training? Jamie. I'm just reporting. And I think, Jamie, that's one of the questions about what is an adequate payback. But I would also say that, actually, to be honest, law and business are no different. And actually, I think, many of our colleagues, certainly our colleagues who are in law and business, who are on the partner track in any of those environments, work as hard or harder than we do. They don't actually get a day off a week. They don't have an 80-hour work week. And I know that sounds, but, you talk to the folks who are sort of on Wall Street in the investment banking, and they're there at, 6 or 7, and they go home at 11 o'clock every night. Yeah. So I don't think medicine is actually, if you're in a high-power career track, I don't think medicine is any different than the other professions, and I think we sometimes lose sight of that. What I do think is a real advantage to medicine is that it's easier to work part-time. right? Because you can do clinical work, and you may sort of step out or slow down your trajectory in terms of moving into a higher rank or something like that, but you absolutely can work part-time and do something you were trained to do and love, which is actually very different than law or business. Mike? Right, in terms of what you have for retirement, yeah. And I think that the issue is it's not about it's about being happy with the choices you make. And that's one of the things when we talk about mentoring young people. And increasingly, as we move to the millennials, we see these kind of issues of family life balance being important not just for women, but for men as well. And my perspective of this is perfectly, you make whatever choice you make, but you have to appreciate the consequences. What we see is young people who make these choices and then are cranky because they don't have the academic advancement or the salary that they're folks who have worked. And then the discussion goes to, well, why do you have to work 70 hours a week to be able to get, and that one has not been answered yet. Family, and it's almost like a throwback of what family means. For this generation, family is the Donna Reed thing. It's the nuclear family and mom being home and dinner on the table. I've often thought to myself that drive-through fast food, if you're sitting down in the car on the way to dance, counts as a sit-down family dinner, right? We're all together, we're chatting, but it's different now. Whereas the boomers lived to work, this group works to live, and they want more balance. And what you define as adequate balance is different in different generations, how much you need of what. In particular for Gen Xers, the boomers, if you worked hard, you would advance. The boomers and the traditionalists, remember, these were the group that stayed in one job. They stayed in one job, they retired out on a pension, right, and were set for life. Now folks are looking at Detroit, right? And all of a sudden your pension's gone and you have no health benefits and you put all your time and energy in. So work is no guarantee of survival anymore. We see the layoffs, we see the downsizing. So actually work doesn't mean survival, so you need to have another way of survival. So the question that this generation and the millennials want to know is, what is it going to take for me to survive? And in our medical school environment, what does it take to survive? Knowing what's on the test. So I think, one of the things that frustrates faculty a lot when we work with young people is the question they ask is, what's going to be on the test, not, do I understand this? Can I understand this, or can you help me appreciate this? But again, shortest means to an end. You know it's going to be on the test. Their goal is to do well on the test. You could actually argue that's taking care of self, right? Because I could study for 40 hours and find the 3 things that you're going to put on the test, or you could tell me the 3 things you're going to put on the test, and I would learn those, right? Not necessarily lazy, not necessarily entitled, very practical, but a very different mindset of how you would do this. Certainly the old chain of command is burdensome, right? These, because they're not into self-sacrifice, this group of young people and the millennials that follow them have no problem telling you what they need and how you should do business, right? It's not about hierarchy. It's about what's good for me. They're used to challenging and being challenged. They like to ask why. This multitasking thing is actually is omnipresent. They're often incorrectly accused of having little to no attention span. You know, it's the Sesame Street generation where everything's in 30-second bullets. They do process work differently, and they handle lots of information at the same time. Now, the other piece to appreciate that this is just a reality. Much is now being written that multitasking is maybe not as effective as people think it is, that you're actually not able to put your mind to the task at hand, and really we're just raising a generation of ADD individuals, you know. But what I see, I mean, the play out to this is, it's just amazing with the technology. A student will be thinking about something, and there'll be a disease and they don't know about it. It's being discussed. They go to their whatever equipment they have in their hand, they look it up, they get the answer, and they move on. You know, how many of us wrote lists of things we were going to look up at home and never looked up, right? I certainly do. I still have lists of things I'm going to look up. Now, the reality is they also take themselves out of the conversation at hand when they do that. So good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know, but it's a reality. They also see no problem with checking Facebook and texting and reading their email at the same time as well. In the classroom for Gen X, they don't like the traditional classroom, and we're seeing this more and more. They actually do read less than the older generations, and they respond more to visual stimuli. YouTube, I have to tell you, I walked in to the conference room up at the VA about 3 weeks ago, the precepting room, and I walked in, and two fellows and one of my junior faculty were just clustered around the tube, and they had these horrible faces on. They were just, I said, what the heck are you looking at? They Googled paronychia and how to IND it, because they were going to go IND a paronychia. And I walked in right when the pus exploded on the video, you know. You know, my generation, we'd have gone and looked it up in a book, right? Or just gone and done it. I mean, that's the other thing, you know. But, you know, I can do this, you know. But it made me laugh, because that's where they went. And, oh, by the way, they IND'd the paronychia, and 2 weeks later another paronychia came in, and we IND'd it last night. They IND'd it last night. Communication style, not necessarily politically correct. And I think, you know, it's direct from the beginning, with much less of the fluff that my generation would put. Thank you so much for agreeing to see me. If you have the time, I'd like to talk with you a little wee bit about perhaps a bit of an issue I'm having with, you know, the timing of your lectures. Why are you scheduling classes at 7 a.m., right? You know, it's just, and it's not meant to be rude. It's just, remember, these are kids who text and email. There's not a lot of fluff in text and email. They are independent learners and problem solvers, but it's about outcomes, not process. That comes back to what's on the test. I want the shortest means to the end. They like feedback. They like it all the time, 24/7, immediate and constant. They would prefer it face-to-face and very specific. Now, millennials. This is a recent Time cover labeling the millennials as the me generation. These are young people born from 81 to 2000. For them, technology is like, I mean, the number of pieces of electronic equipment that they have is remarkable. And, you know, really, I ask my medical students and residents to fix my things, right? My children, you know, because they can do that. This group, even more than the Gen Xers, life is for living now. Life is short because you don't know what happened. This group grew up with 9/11, with the Oklahoma City bombing, with the shootings at Columbine and Virginia Tech. You never know what's around the next corner. I mean, if you think about, for me, when I think about 9/11, the thing that was it was actually really funny. I flew in to the airport Friday, and a couple of my college roommates were coming in the same day, and they actually got in before I did. They met me at the gate. You know, you young people don't remember that, but it was so nice. I mean, you could send your children or your parents, or you would go with them to the gate. and send them off, and you would be there waiting with open arms. I mean, it's a freedom and an openness that 9/11 took away. It absolutely took away. And I mean, oh my gosh, TSA and the security check and taking off your shoe. I mean, those are changes in our life that young people live with all the time. So whether they actively think that, that's an awareness. They also grew up with all these Gen X moms who opted out, who all have advanced degrees and are extraordinarily capable, and are managing, instead of managing their company or their practice or their law firm, they're managing their children. So they have busy and overplanned lives. This concept of just go out and play is, again, something that this generation did not grow up with. My generation waxes nostalgically about you go out and you play in the yard and you would do home at 6. Parents had no idea where you were. You weren't going to ballet and soccer and, French class and oboe and whatever, and mom wasn't hovering over you, helping you with your homework. If you didn't do your homework, you got in trouble. Mom didn't bail you out and set the limits. It's just and again, part of the reason kids don't go out and play anymore is because it's a scary world that we live in now, and those things are very real and very different, but they change the psyche. The thing about millennials that is the most striking for me is that they are hopeful and they want to save the world. They, however, want to save the world now. They want to save the world on our medicine clerkship. They have the opportunity to go build houses for Habitat for Humanity in the middle of the medicine clerkship, and they would really like to do that. And they can't, because it is about now and making a difference. And that's wonderful. But the sort of trajectory is a little, in my mind, skewed. They're the information generation. Ask a question, they'll go look it up. This piece about meaningful work is a corollary to they're not willing to pay their dues, right? If it's not a good educational experience for me, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to go. I'm not going to do it. We hear this all the time from students and residents who don't show up where they're assigned to be. And you say, well, why didn't you? I said, well, I wouldn't learn anything. Well, I bet you could have learned something, kind of thing. How would you know if you don't go? But if it's not meaningful and high density and rewarding, it is not valued. And this is about diversity and change. And this piece about diversity and change is really important because it plays out to this, the boomers grew up, loyalty, pay your dues, sacrifice, stay in a corporation, stay in a company and be where you are. And then, at some point you'll be rewarded and it's all good. This generation switches jobs every 2 years, right? They're not, in the corporate world, people move on all the time. They're not interested in paying their dues. And we see it even a little bit in the medical profession. They're technology savvy. This piece is getting a lot of attention. Parents are friends, so they're not terribly used to limit setting and authoritarian rules. Parents negotiate what will happen, and parents bail them out. These are the helicopter moms, right? These are the helicopter moms. And I will tell you, I don't know, I have been contacted several times by medical student parents, which, first of all, I have no idea how they get me. That annoys me, but most recently I was asked to sit on a panel for the University of Pittsburgh undergraduate campus for prospective applicants, parents, who were interested in whether their children could get to medical school from Pitt. Well, okay, the director of admissions is a friend of mine. I said, okay, sure, I'll go with that. I expected 4 people in the room. There were 300 parents in the room. This was like a second look day. The parents all came with the kids. and they all went into the room to ask questions about their kids getting to medical school, right? You know, my answer was like, okay, first of all, way too early for you and your kids to know whether you should be going to medical school, but the hands-on involvement is unbelievable. And if you talk to people, particularly at undergraduate campuses, they have, those of you who may have dropped children off for college in recent years, they now have rules about when parents have to leave campus. And they do these things where they say, okay, we're going to have lots of nice orientation stuff, everybody come together, and now we're going to take the children off here, and we're going to take the parents off here. Please say goodbye before you separate, because parents, you must go home now. You must go home, you know. You're not doing your kid. But these are the parents. I had one acquaintance of mine talk about at Princeton, you have to do a thesis before you can graduate, not for honors, just for graduation, talking about moving up there for 2 weeks to critique, read, and edit her child's thesis. Little scary. So they're way less self-reliant. But on the other hand, again, this hopeful, meaningful diversity is embraced. The world is small. Everybody wants to go overseas and save the world, you know, and those things are wonderful. In the classroom, they're egalitarian. They don't like hierarchy, including the appreciation teachers in charge of the class. However, they are accustomed to adult supervision and structure, so they like to be told exactly what to do. They like having that laid out for them. Polite, attentive, and respectful. I think we have some bridge on that, I would say. They prefer internet resources over textbooks, but they are, again, outcomes-oriented, immediate feedback. They want, I would say, face-to-face really means individual feedback. They want you to tell them specifically not only what they did well and didn't do well, but where the exam is tomorrow. I mean, I have received emails from medical students asking me where the ethics exam is tomorrow. It's where the course takes place every week. It's posted on Navigator. It's in the syllabus. And there are 153 other students in your class who know the answer to that. And oh, by the way, emailing me for a short turnaround, as Alda said once to a medical student, is a really rookie mistake, you know. And so you know, so but what I learned is it wasn't being disrespectful or lazy or stupid. In their minds, it's the shortest means to an end, right? I'm the course director. I'm giving the exam. I know where the exam is, so they'll just email me, and I should tell them, you know. And well, 3 days later, I hoped they had made the exam. And this is this piece about communicating differently. They're always connected, this immediate question and answer, and the 24/7 in touch. So they expect this continuous back and forth on email. They prefer texting, certainly Facebook, and they function differently. You know, this is, we're getting into this now hugely in our educational efforts because of the issues about they want to learn when and where they want it, which means not in our classrooms. So, you know, one of the stressors that the medical school is struggling with right now is lectures are passé. And so we have to figure this out. They are, however, much less self-reliant. They really need to be told what to do and where to go. And parents are still telling them what to do and where to go. What other generations say about the millennials, the traditionalists say they don't know what hard work is, they don't respect experience or follow procedures, and they're not educated. Boomers, we say they're slackers. They're not willing to put in their time. They're rude. They lack social skills. They always want to do things their own way instead of the right way, because clearly we know the right way. They spend too much time on the internet, and they won't wait their turn. I mean, I can remember having a young man on the wards who was a third-year medical student. He was the only student, and it was like an ADD. You know, he thought of something and he asked it. He thought of something and he asked it. And, you know, we're learner-centered and trying to support this. And finally, one day, I just gave him the hand. You know, I tried all my good nonverbals, you know, hold that thought, we'll come back to that. No impact. Finally, one day, I looked at him and I said, "Are you an only child?" And he went, "Yes, actually, I am." You are not an only child in this setting. They won't wait their turn, the shortest means to an end, and perceived as rude. But for him, I knew the answer to the question, and he wanted it right then. He wanted it right then. There's a great speech that I would refer you to. It's available on YouTube. It's called "You Are Not Special." The bottom line advice is to climb the mountain so you can see the world, not so the world can see you. And the agenda here is that it's not all about you. Okay? Nearly 2 million hits, overwhelmingly positives, even from millennials. So the question you might ask is, how did millennials get this way? Well, they were raised in an era where the belief was that self-esteem led to greater success. There was a clear change in parenting textbooks. The pediatricians in the room can speak to this. But it was all about building your child's self-esteem, because the idea was that self-esteem led to success. So everybody got a trophy. I mean, my kids went to Falk where they were graded on effort, right? And they just, I mean, who knew how they were doing? They were graded on effort. I transferred them to the Fox Chapel system, which was a little less, you know, generationally friendly. And I wanted them to get in the gifted program. And they said, "Why do you think they should be in the gifted program? What are their grades?" And I went, "They have no grades." They're like, "Well, why do you think they should?" "Well, they're my children. Well, certainly they should be in the gifted program." But that piece about we don't have winners, we don't have losers, you don't compete, everybody gets a trophy. You know, those things are very, it was to increase self-esteem. Only later did it become clear that self-esteem was a result of success, not the marker of success. And then all that self-esteem leads them to be disappointed because the world refuses to affirm their greatness. You know, we talk now a lot about, you know, for parenting, the advice that is given now is not to tell the children how smart they are if they do something well, but to tell them, look how well you did because you worked so hard, which is actually a huge difference if you think about it. And a lot's being written about if you try and you don't do well, kids opt out now because it's too much work. It's too much work. And they haven't learned that because they didn't get a trophy for their first effort. They haven't learned the hard work. And I think we see this. We see some of our medical students who've been at the top of the mountain their whole life, and they stumble when they get here. And they have no resources or structure or ability to back it up and say, okay, I didn't put in enough hours. I underestimated how much work I have to do, and I have to buckle down, and I have to change my personal professional balance. You know, those things are very hard for some of our learners of this generation. This current generation of millennials has the highest likelihood of having unmet expectations and the lowest level of success for their careers. Part of it is because, remember, they should get a trophy like every 3 weeks, and everything they do should be meaningful. I mean, I see this in my youngest daughter, who just, you know, she's working somewhere and somebody's, you know, the manager's stupid and this is dumb and this is like, Jessica, you've been there 3 weeks. You know, I mean, and yes, you know, you have this conversation with lots of our residents and our medical students about there's lots of stuff that we all do that is annoying and petty, right? How about that hand washing training, right? You know, this is not a meaningful contribution to my work, but it's a rule and you have to do it. It's a crisis of unmet expectations. This boundless self-esteem leads to what is perceived as entitlement, which is difficult for faculty because everyone is not special. Everyone is not. You're special in your own way, but you're not honors special. Everyone is not honor special. So the implication if we contrast boomers, the sort of, more senior faculty, to the millennials, boomers, it's all about how hard you work. If you're professional, you're going to stay. 2 hours? Really? Please. Total dedication to the job above all else. And we are at risk of perceiving millennials as not committed. Millennials focus on caring for self and family. They're committed to balance. They come to the table with much higher educational debt, which is really challenging for them because they don't really want to work super hard and they want to go save the world. And nobody pays you to save the world. And so that's a bit of a challenge. That's that crisis of unmet expectations. They play in teams, real-time information, and it's all about technology. So the opportunities for miscommunication, what I expect you to do for your job, what you want to do, how you expect to be rewarded, who our role models are. And the challenge for us, I think, as we teach, mentor, help the next generation, is to translate values of commitment, professionalism, dedication, which are the same for all the generation, into behaviors, because we translate them differently. There are certainly things in the medical world that have been an issue, work hour regulations, the handoffs, the team approach. These are real challenges for us and for our learners in how to maintain these. So we come back to the two examples. What the reason I was dictatorial and maternalistic is because the feedback I gave was that this was unprofessional and inappropriate. So I was heavy-handed. I learned from it, in retrospect, he wasn't being rude. What he was being was millennial. So, oh, by the way, the next year it happened again. And at that time, I waited till the end of the session. I pulled the student aside and I said, I need to let you know that this will be perceived as unprofessional. So this is feedback to me from you. Even though you participate, I want to make sure that you don't alienate some much less informed boomer than myself about these things. I did give him a trophy. I did. I made it meaningful. But having said that, it went much better. Right? And he never opened his laptop again, at least in my course. Hard to know what happened in others. For my little fellow, this is a absolutely true story, and I knew the fellow well enough to know that the fellow was just millennial. This is the shortest means to the end. Her faculty mentor had all those articles. Why was she going to go look for those articles? He knew all that. Why would she do all this work? So for her, it was about the end. For him, it was about the process. And the way this came back to me, she was my fellow, long gone, so talk about it now. The faculty mentor complained to another faculty member and said, you need to tell Missy that her fellow is really a slacker. And so then no communication between the fellow and the research mentor, huge miscommunication. Finally, the other faculty came to me, and I'm like, seriously, just tell her. Called her in, I said, look, I realize what you're doing, this is the means to the end, but you really made your research mentor mad, you have to go, and I knew her, she's hardworking, good kid, but she wanted to do other things. So they had a clarifying moment. But it was, but Jamie, we see this all the time. It's like, how many people come, certainly I'm the female part of the medicine thing, so I get the calls about so-and-so is wearing too short a dress or too low a cut, whatever, or too much makeup or too many piercings. And then you say, did you tell them? And they go, oh, no. I couldn't tell them that. You go, okay, seriously? So the scenarios that I presented are thought for you. Why do they occur? Different core values, different views of personal professional of balance, things they value differently, and a lack of appreciation for the ways that different generations see the world. When I give this talk to students, I say, when you talk to faculty like this, you're going to make them mad, and you're not going to mean to. So you need to understand how a boomer like myself thinks, right? And if you want to communicate in the way you communicate, and you want to make me mad, have at it. But just do it because you want to, not because you were clueless. I was giving it to the first-year students, and some of the fourth years I was working with were in the room, and one of them came up to me afterward, and he said, I could have used this talk. I said, oh, well, what happened? He goes, he talked about sending an email to one of the faculty members, very politely worded, but it closed with, I hope to hear from you by the end of business today. You know, faculty member wrote this like 3 days later, this blistering dialogue about, you know, the rudeness of it. Just different strokes. So how do you handle these problems in mentoring and teaching? You can ignore them and their consequences, which I think is what most of us do, and we whine behind the scenes or in public. We react to them and we allow the miscommunications to accelerate, passing judgment without giving feedback, like the research mentor that I talked about, passed judgment but never cleared the air. Or what I hope to have left you with today is some understanding of how to anticipate and prevent them. Ways to motivate: you will be working with other bright and creative people. Learner-centered, multi-sensory. They like to be entertained. You have to tell them continuously how they individually are doing. And sometimes it's not a trophy, but you still need to tell them. Teamwork in groups, and appreciate that expect less formal relationships with authority figures, because remember, their parents were friends. You know, I had a first-year medical student not too long ago, first week of medical school, sent me an email addressing me by Melissa, with a bunch of other stuff that made me mad too. So I wrote him back and I said, dear Fred, what? It was very polite. It was very polite. It was very polite. And I was actually on vacation at the time, and I was just, my children were there. They're going, okay. So I wrote him back and I said, you know, in response to your complaints about the ethics, law, and professionalism course, which is like 3 days old, you know, you're wrong for these reasons, and we will continue this. And oh, by the way, I've never, ever had a first-year medical student call me by my first name without being invited to. Please, that in and of itself is unprofessional. Please schedule a meeting to talk with me. And he wrote back and he went, Dr. McNeil, dear Dr. McNeil, I would like to schedule a meeting with you, but I'm afraid. And I went, okay. My job is done. My job is done. And to be honest, I went on to mentor that kid enormously through his 4 years, because it turned out he had Asperger's, and it was just a mess. But sometimes setting limits and giving direct feedback is welcome. Sometimes it's not. But so remember, different goals, expectation, priorities. These cause misunderstanding. And what I want you to remember is these impact on us achieving our goals. You know, we can moan and whine all we want, but it's reality. So if we want to be effective in teaching and motivating these young people, we have to appreciate it. And we can be misjudged just like they can. So decide what you really want for yourself and out of the relationship when you're in a generational difference. And this is probably the most important bullet. Don't think about how you think it should be done, but refocus your brain on the goal you are seeking and ask, how would I behave if I wanted these results from the person I'm interacting with? And remember, the only people we can control are ourselves. We can't change other generations. So with that, I'll stop. I know we're a little bit after 9, but if there are questions, we can chat.